Hi, dear friends, you are watching WStv, Workers Socialist TV, and this is our program Samayiki, the program of current affairs, our daily routine program at 8 p.m. So, first of all, I would like to appeal to you to subscribe our channels, Facebook channel, YouTube channel, Telegram channel, and Twitter channel. This is the voice of international socialism, WStv. Kindly subscribe its channel so that notifications should come to you automatically, and kindly request your friends also to subscribe to it and propagate the videos of WSTV as far as possible. So, in today's Samayiki, we are taking up the program that relates to the war in Ukraine. You all are well aware that war in Ukraine is the focal point of news and media discussions. All political focus in world affairs today is upon this war in Ukraine. This war is, each passing day, this war is escalating. It is escalating, it is spiraling up, and with this is spiraling up the crisis of imperialism. The imperialism, it is not that this war has dragged imperialism, the world capitalism, into crisis, but it is the world capitalism that has ultimately given birth to this war. Its internal contradictions, war is emanating out of this internal contradictions of capitalism, of imperialism. This is the first thing. Secondly, there is no doubt that war in itself, which is a final product of these contradictions, of capitalist contradictions, in itself is now assisting in escalation of this and spiraling up of this crisis of imperialism, that is reflecting itself not only to an economic crisis but a political crisis in the first place. So, what are its consequences, the short-term consequences and the long-term implications? We will discuss them, but before that, it is necessary for us to discuss the war, the content of the war, the essence of the war, and the very character of the war, which is the main bone of contention among leftist parties, leftist thinkers all over the world, and the imperialist agencies. They are keenly indulged into a propaganda that propagates this war as a war imposed upon Ukraine by Russia. So, first of all, let us discuss the very character of the war, which will determine its prospects also, how the war is going to develop in future, where the war is going to lead, and what would be the consequences. So, we will come to those questions only after we deliberate upon the character of the war. So, in the first place, entire Western world, the corporate media, the entire press that is run by the force of billions of dollars, that in one voice is now screaming that Ukraine has become victim of a Russian aggression, and this ultimately this leads to the slogan, the central slogan around which all of these powers are now they are organizing themselves, and they are mobilizing a sort of mass opinion, we can say. So that central slogan is Putin, come out of Ukraine, Russia, out of Ukraine. So we have to understand this, whether this war has been started, whether this war is generated out of this Russian aggression which has started on 24th of February. So this would be totally untrue and totally false to claim that this war, present war, which we are seeing before our eyes now, and which is being propagated internationally by corporate media, especially the Western media, the Western-based media, US and NATO allied media, So its propagation that this war is generated by the Russian assault on 24th of February is a blatant lie. In fact, this war was ongoing since 2014. It was in 2014 that the imperialist contradictions and especially the eastward advance of Western powers means US plus NATO. So this eastward advance of these powers that had come to a breaking point where it was necessary for these Western powers to break up the remaining part of Soviet Union, the largest part, the Russia, and to snatch from its hands not only its own territories, but before that, the territories adjoining to it, which Russia was viewing as its buffer zone. And one among these buffer zones was Ukraine. The most important territory is Ukraine because Ukraine is the buffer zone between, we can say, the Western world and Russia. And for long, Russia had viewed Ukraine as this buffer zone. So in 2014, in what they claim as Maidan Uprising, the US and NATO had pressed into service a military campaign, a concealed, a deceitful military campaign, which they say it was a Maidan Uprising, an internal uprising in Ukraine. So there was internal dissent, there is no doubt, and that internal dissent was very legitimate also, insofar as the regime, the pro-Moscow regime that existed at the time in Ukraine was there. That was not a popular regime. We can't say that it was a popular regime, but like all regimes in the world, all bourgeois regimes in the world, it was also an anti-popular, an anti-people regime. But in overturning that regime, US and NATO had played a very effective and very decisive role. So this role was not only in logistic support to this civilian movement, but a direct military intervention into Ukraine. And through this military intervention, the entire Ukraine, that included the Crimean territory also, that was separated from Russia. In a swift move, immediately after this separation of Ukraine, means this overturning of pro-Russian government in Ukraine, immediately Russia had moved and it separated Crimea. It snatched Crimea from the hands of Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government at the time was supported, directly supported, and I would say that this Maidan Uprising was aided by ultra-right groups, the fascist groups like Azov battalions, the Svoboda party, that is today, even today it is supporting the Ukrainian regime under President Zelensky. So this was the handiwork, this Maidan Uprising was the handiwork of not only of these fascist brigades, but these fascist brigades in themselves, they were acting as puppets of US NATO. And US NATO was playing, they were playing a decisive role in this uprising. And through this uprising, the pro-Kremlin government was overturned by force of arms. Later on, as I said, that Crimea was separated from Ukraine as a reaction to this overturning of pro-Kremlin government. But even then, the entire region of Donbass that houses the provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk, so that remained as part of Ukrainian territory. And in these last, we can say, 8 years, the Ukrainian government, the fascist-sponsored government of Zelensky, that has committed a sort of genocide in this Donbass area. This Donbass area was subjected to all sorts of crimes, all sorts of criminal acts that a government could commit there. And given this criminal campaign by Zelensky government in Donbass area, 14,000, more than 14,000 plus have become have fallen victim to this genocidal campaign. So, this entire area, which is Russian speaking area and which Russia claims allegiance to, this was being subjected to this sort of criminal repression, a military repression where fascist groups were on day-to-day basis, they were repeating what they had what they had done in Kiev in 2014. You must remember that in Kiev of 2014, they had how they had annihilated the labor leaders, how they had set to fire, to arson the trade union house in Kiev, and a number of, there is a whole chain of these criminal acts that were committed by these fascist groups, Azov battalions specifically, we can name them. So these ultra right wing groups, they were the social base of the Zelensky government. They were political support to Zelensky government, and they were being fed and aided by US and NATO. US and NATO was supplying all sorts of civilian, financial and military aid to this Azov battalions, and these battalions in turn, Svoboda Party was the supporting party of Zelensky government, and behind it these Azov battalions were committing the crimes which Zelensky government openly under the constitution, even under the constitution of Ukraine, couldn't have committed. So this was all going on, and this war, we can say that this war has not started with 24th February Russian assault, but this had already started in 2014. In 2014, it had taken off, and in these 8 years, all sorts of crimes were committed there, not only in Donbas area. Donbas area was subjected to this vicious campaign, vicious military campaign, but in entire Ukraine, all leftists, communists, socialists, they were arrested of all hues. They were arrested, the criminal charges were put up against them, and in most of the cases they were annihilated on the spot. So this sort of campaign was going on there. Therefore, to say that this war has started on 24th February and to put entire blame upon Putin is absolutely incorrect. Factually, it is wrong. So the war has started in 2014, and even before 2014, it is not in 2014. In fact, 2014 was prepared very carefully for a long time, and during this long time, we can safely say that Putin, under an illusion, Putin and the Russian oligarchs under him, under an illusion, they were thinking that their Western friends, as they had called them again and again, that their Western friends, US and NATO, they would remain in permanent friendship and peace with Russia, and they would have no eastward ambitions. But behind the screen, behind this curtain of friendship, US and NATO were carefully preparing their eastward advance, and they were preparing Ukraine as a land where fascist squads, fascist battalions could have overturned and taken the reins of power in their hands in a moment. So that turning point, that breaking point had come in 2014, where their preparations were matured. They were in full preparation and they carried out the operation. This operation had alarmed Putin. The 2014 operation had alarmed Putin, and probably we could say that before this Putin was not aware of this, but Putin was not ready to come in conflict with US and NATO. In fact, Putin himself was having no ambitions to expand his territory to westwards. Rather, he was thinking, he was planning, and he was already having a share in the booty of loot from exploitation of workers and toilers of the world. But he was enjoying that booty, and he was planning to enjoy in future also, in conjunction, in agreement with his Western friends, US and NATO. But US and NATO were planning something else. It was exactly like Stalin wanted to have a permanent friendship with Hitler after 1939. But Hitler was thinking something else. Hitler was thinking to head off Stalin and to head off Soviet Union under Stalin. So the same situation was here, that Putin, he was innocently or knowingly or sheepishly, he was following the Western powers. He was collaborating with them, US and NATO, in all military operations, in making the war permanent over the globe. Since after, at least we can say, 1995. So Putin was fully cooperating with these powers, and he was thinking that they have become allies in the loot of the working and toiling people of the world. But ultimately these allies, these wolves, these dacoits have started fighting among themselves, because the super looters, the super thieves sitting in New York and London and Paris, they were already planning something else, which Putin might have thought, but he was not sure whether his Western friends would betray him so soon. So Putin was betrayed, and very soon Putin had the taste of this eastward military expansion of US and NATO. So the first thing, while characterizing this war, because many of the left parties, and I would say that most of the left parties, they have mobilized themselves and their supporters around the slogan which is slogan of US and NATO, and that slogan is Putin out of Ukraine. So because most of the left parties, they are supporting this slogan, they have mobilized themselves and their supporters around this slogan. Therefore, there is a I would say that there is a mass illusion around the world. There is mass illusion, and given this illusion, what is being sold out to masses is that Russia is an aggressor. This aggression is Russian aggression, and Ukraine is the victim. Now we must understand, first of all, this most important aspect of this war, that Ukraine is not an independent territory, and Ukraine is not participating in this war for long. Ukraine is participating in the war for long, but Ukraine is not participating in the war on its own. Ukraine is not fighting for its national interests. Ukraine has become a military base for US and NATO long before. Now the allegations are coming, and Russia says that it has proof in support of those allegations. We can't confirm this, but these allegations are coming that US was having at least 26 biolabs in which bioweapons were being prepared in Ukraine. These labs were financed by US, and they were working on Ukrainian territory. A question was asked in US Congress by congressman, and in reply to that, government has conceded that yes, a letter was issued by Health Ministry of Ukraine instructing for destruction of all samples of deadly diseases. So that means that labs were working. labs were working for this sort of bioweaponry. And these were not biolabs, these were biomilitary campaigns. So these were part of that conspiracy in which Ukraine was involved. Ukraine had become a sort of territory where US and NATO were going to install their most deadly missiles, nuclear weaponry. Biolabs were already working there. So it was being converted in a military territory behind the back of Ukrainians. The Ukrainian civil population was not aware of it, but the fascist bands were aware of it. They were involved in everything, and they were at the helm of the affairs of Ukrainian government and Ukrainian regime. So this all was happening. Amidst this Russian aggression has come. Russia has definitely invaded Ukraine, and Russia has not invaded Ukraine as an aggressor. It was invited by Donetsk and Luhansk governments. They have invited Russia to save them from genocide that was being imposed upon them through by Kiev, and Kiev government has never denied that they were not at war with this Donetsk region. So first thing in this war is that this conflict in Ukraine is not the result of a Russian aggression, as right-wing media is trying to propagate. In fact, it is the net result and the final consequence of a protracted and permanent war of Western imperialists of Western origin to advance upon the East. Not only Russia, but then after Russia, China also, and maybe then India also. So to colonize entire territory of East and Far East, these Western powers, the Western imperialists under US and NATO, banner of US and NATO, they had already imposed a sort of permanent war, which we can see in ongoing war in Middle East, the West Asia, in African countries. That war is already there. So they had already imposed this war upon the world, especially upon the backward region of the East, and they were advancing towards the East. First of all, they wanted to gobble up the periphery of Russia, and they succeeded in that. This NATO, it was formed in 1948-49, and after that, from 14 countries, it is now having 44 countries, and most of its members are the newly recruited members are the countries around Russia. So the Russia was being encircled, it was being surrounded by the hostile territories, the territories that were having affiliation to US and NATO and the military project under US and NATO. So this was the situation. It is not that Russia has suddenly intervened in Ukraine and Ukraine has become victim of that attack. So Ukraine was one of the territories through which US and NATO was surrounding Russia, and therefore Russia for itself was having no other means, was having no other defense except to overturn the government that was importing US NATO into Ukraine on the borders of Russia. This government has it's not a legitimate government. It has no legitimacy because this government in itself has come through Maidan Uprising, which was funded and supported by US and NATO. It was an installed government through this US and NATO intervention in Ukraine. This intervention from US and NATO had installed this government, and therefore this government in itself was not having any legitimacy, no origins in any legal or constitutional process, but was installed by the hostile camp of US and NATO. Similarly, this government is supported by fascist bands who are having a final say inside the government. You can see the negotiator has been killed. One of the negotiators has been killed. One of the top military functionaries has been killed by these Azov battalions recently during the talks. So these Azov battalions, fascist battalions, are having the final say in the present Ukrainian government. So Ukrainian government cannot say that it's a government of democracy or it is having any constitutional basis. It is the product of Maidan Uprising, and it is based upon these Azov battalions, not on any democratic foundations. So this is the first thing, that here to say that Russia is aggressor is absolutely incorrect. Then second thing is that this war is not between Ukraine and Russia as is being posed by Western media. It is not that the big brother Russia has pounced upon Ukraine. It is not that. The war is between US and NATO, the big military powers of US and NATO, the big military machine of US and NATO, of which Ukraine was becoming part, on the one hand, and on the other hand Russia. So Russia was being made, and it was falling victim to this design in which Ukraine was integrated by US and NATO, and the war was being imposed upon Russia. Today or tomorrow, this war was to take place. So this is second aspect and very important aspect of the war. Third aspect is that war has not started on 24th of February with Russian aggression. Rather, the war has started in 2014, even beyond 2014, and the war is direct handiwork of US and NATO, and Russia cannot be blamed for that. Russia has retaliated against the 2014 aggression and had taken Crimea out of the hands of US and NATO. But then Ukraine, the remaining Ukraine, was posing a live danger for Russia, and not only for Russia but for peace and tranquility of entire Eurasia. So later or sooner, today or tomorrow, this war was to come. This conflict was to take place, and this has come. Rather, we would say that Russia has become late in addressing the issue. It should have addressed the issue long before. But in saying so, we cannot bail out Putin of the crimes that he has committed. For long, since 1991, he has been an ally with US and NATO in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in entire Middle East, until a conflict had arisen on the question of Syria. Russia was a complacent ally with US and NATO war machine, and Russia had accepted its inferior position. It had become B team of this military machine of US NATO, and it had accepted that, but on the condition that these Western powers would not march towards East. And as Western powers, this alliance is broken, not because of any principle of Putin, as Putin is saying that he wants to denazify Ukraine. So denazification is not his principle, but because these Western powers have pounced upon Russia, they have advanced towards Russia, they are advanced eastwards. So this eastward advance of these Western powers, that has in fact broken the unity between Putin and these Western powers, and it has shown Putin his place in this alliance. So Donbass, the area of Donbass, region of Donbass, continues to suffer. A sort of, we can say, national repression, as the Russian speaking population is housed in this region. And I already told you that 14,000, more than 14,000 have been killed in this war before Russia has interfered here. So this is the characterization of the war. Putin himself is not guilty of this war, but he is guilty of other crimes. He is guilty of assisting these criminals, NATO and US, for a long time, for a fairly long time. And Putin is guilty of strengthening their military power and giving them the power on the basis of which now they have advanced towards the east. It has given them legitimacy and a sort of image in the minds of Western people also, Western population also, that has hugely helped the Western military machine at the moment when it was advancing towards the east, and it was advancing towards the east under the banner of democracy, for restoring democracy is against Russia itself. Russia is posed as a dictatorial country upon which an oligarchy is ruling, and West is being posed as a democracy. So far as we would say Putin's crimes are concerned, this is not the only crime. It is in immediate past. In distant past also, Putin and his ancestors, of whom Putin himself is successor, his Stalin's ancestors, and Putin himself, who was chief of KGB in the Stalinist regime, they are collectively responsible, and Putin is severally responsible also for fall of Soviet Union, which has created and which has prepared the ground for this Western aggression. So Putin is guilty of so many crimes, but yes, Putin is not guilty of aggression against Ukraine. Rather, the Ukraine was the territory of aggression, of US NATO aggression. Now, coming to implications of this war, you can see that there are certainly short-term implications, and besides them there are long-term implications also. Short-term implications we can find in the words of Biden's speech today. US President Joe Biden has said today that the escalating prices, the price hike in US is the net result of Russian aggression upon Ukraine. The oil crisis, the crude oil prices are escalating, and therefore there is a general price hike in all commodities. And he has said that Americans understand it well, that all this crisis is due to Russian aggression. So this crisis is building up. This is the immediate crisis. The price hike is the immediate crisis with crude oil prices. The general price hike is there, and this is the immediate expression of the crisis that is coming up. The long-term expression, the long-term consequences of this crisis that is brewing up, they are devastating. As war builds up, we cannot claim this at this moment, but we can all see with our open eyes that this crisis can anytime it can escalate into a world war, the World War III. World War III, which has to take place essentially as a nuclear war in which all chemicals, biological and all weapons are to be used. They would be used, and they would be used without notice and at the shortest possible time, because every country knows that the time is too short, and the country which would use its nuclear arsenal, its chemical arsenal, before other country would emerge as winner, though nobody would be winner in this war. It would be devastating war, and nuclear winter may set in. But at this juncture, we can say that these long-term consequences of the war, they may be few days away, they may be few weeks away, they may be few months away, they may be few years away, but the consequences that are emerging, they are no less devastating than these long-term consequences, the immediate consequences. The working people all over the world, they are going to face sudden and immediate downfall in the living standards. The prices are soaring, they are spiraling sky high in each country. It is not only in Russia, as US and NATO were telling their people, their own subjects, their citizens, that we would strangulate Russia. Now it is seeming, now it is becoming very clear, absolutely clear, that before Russia would be strangulated, these NATO countries, these European powers, they would be strangulating themselves and their citizens. As winter would set in, there would be huge gas crisis, there would be huge oil crisis, and Europe, the coldest of the countries in Europe, they cannot remain without Russian gas and Russian oil. So if this crisis spirals, for the moment, Russia is threatened that it would stop all gas and oil supply to Europe. So if it happens, then there would be lots and lots of deaths in Europe. The working class, the toiling masses in Europe, at present they are not able to pay for oil and gas at the present prices. And if in future there is a huge price hike, so working class, there would be a crash, an economic crash in Europe. And not only in Europe, we can see that today these oil companies have escalated approximately 75 rupees per litre in petrol in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is already in the midst of the crisis. India may be the next. Other countries may be engulfed very soon. So this crisis brewing up, and what will be the exact magnitude of this crisis? Not the distant crisis, not the long-term crisis, but the short-term crisis. What will be the magnitude? We cannot even calculate that. We will be witness to it in coming days, in coming weeks. So dear friends, with these words and with an appeal against this war and the chief source of war, the US and NATO military machine, and more than them, the capitalism itself, the whole system of imperialism, the establishment of capitalism all over the world. So that has to be overturned, that has to be challenged, and that has to be countered if world wants to live in peace, if the world wants to live without war, without deaths, without these mass murders like we are seeing in Ukraine, and without these military conflicts. A struggle for a socialist society, a struggle for socialist overturn must come on the order of the day, on the top of the agenda, of political agenda of revolutionary parties. So with this, comrades, I would seek your liberty to close this discussion of today, and we'll meet tomorrow. We will continue to discuss this war in Ukraine. It is very important as a focal point of all political discussion in the world today. So we'll continue deliberations on that, and we will continue to fight together for peace, for socialism, and against this barbarism and imperialism, against fascism and war. Thank you very much. Thank you, friends.